Oh, good heavens.
You there! Yeah, you. You're a star. Don't let anybody tell you different. Everyone watching this video is a star, and the reason for this is rooted in the Big Bang. Before anything, there was nothing. But in this nothing was something, an infinitely compact mass about the size of a head of a pin. But for the sake of convenience, and for a more comprehensible scale, I'm going to be using a golf ball for reference. This ball is everything. Every person, every plant, every planet, every universal force expanded from this single point at the speed of light in a process called inflation. Though it will keep expanding throughout the incomprehensible lifespan of the universe, we're only going to be looking at slices during different important periods. After inflation began, the universe was way too hot to form anything cohesive. This state was known as the Bose-Einstein condensate, a mass of rapidly moving quarks all swimming around in a superheated plasma soup. Let's take a closer look.
Hey Jim, I was wondering if you'd like to get together sometime. You know, I really like you, Paul, but my situation is pretty heated right now. Once things cool down and my schedule isn't so fluid, I'd love to get together sometime. Well, let me know if things change.
And this happened billions of times over millions of years, but as the condensate began to cool and the quarks began to settle down, something miraculous happened.
You know, Paul, it's been a while since we last spoke, but I thought a lot about it, and I think we should get together. Well, thanks. And yeah, I do think that'd be a good idea.
And so, quarks came together to form the atoms of some very simple elements, notably hydrogen and helium gas. And over millions of years, these gases began to clump up together, creating small clusters. These clusters came together, and eventually the forces of gravity compacted enough hydrogen and helium into a dense enough mass to ignite under its own weight. And thus, after 100 million years since the universe was first put into motion, the first stars were born. And as the universe continued to expand and cool, the smaller stars began to die, first exhausting their nuclear fuel needed for fusion, and finally meeting their violent end in the form of a massive explosion. Their time in the cosmos was not in vain, however, as their explosive finale resulted in an eruption of new, heavier elements upwards to magnesium. Larger stars at least 5 times bigger than our own sun met their end in a fantastic supernova, which resulted in much heavier elements such as gold, silver, iron, and gallium. With the new miasma of elemental stew flying around, the planetary building blocks had finally entered the universal rat race. The new, more complex material began to coalesce into nebulae, rich clouds of particle dust swirling around in orbit around a denser collection of gases. Our nebula, the Solar Nebula, began to form first as an aimless swirl, but about 4.5 billion years ago, it is highly likely that the shock wave from the death of a nearby star set into motion the formation of the planet. And once the center of the nebula became dense enough, the sun ignited, ejecting excess material and leaving only the underbaked planets. Earth at this point was a hot ball of magma. Though, over time, the atmosphere began to cool and rains poured across the planet. The ocean slowly filled the indentations around the early continents. Algae began to grow in the highly carbon-filled oceans, mass-producing great quantities of oxygen. The first protozoas came to be, and over millions of years of consumption, death, and rebirth, larger animals began to fill the ocean floor. The high oxygen environment created by the algae supported the growth of massive fauna, protected from the highly radioactive sun by the ocean. The atmosphere began to change. Excess oxygen and carbon leaked into the air along with other trace gases. Eventually, a protective layer of ozone formed, allowing ocean creatures to venture onto land.
Speed round.
Massive mammals, insects, and reptiles began to roam the landscape for millions of years. Megaflora began to populate more humid environments, supplying millions of tons of food to support the megafauna. Eventually, a big, mean, nasty rock absolutely decimated the early animals, leaving only a few small species and most ocean-faring creatures alive. Eventually, early Neanderthals began to roam the lands of what is now known as Africa, slowly branching out and populating many parts of the world. Over hundreds of thousands of years of hunting and gathering, they said, "Screw this," and began to work in the arts in ancient Greece, Florence, Asia, and most of Europe. The Renaissance happened, leading to a new understanding of art. Isaac Newton created calculus during the quarantine from the plague. Christopher Columbus left and was the second person to discover America. Religion got all whack in France and the Holy Roman Empire, leading a bunch of Puritans to leave and colonize America. A whole ton of complicated stuff happened in the New World between the Puritans and the natives, an ongoing conflict that is still going to this day. And from that point, America slowly began to come together. Eventually, this group of dirty vagrants said to themselves, "Why should we pay taxes for people thousands of miles away who don't really do anything to help us?" And so the American Revolutionary War began. Eventually, a bunch of cold, pale, sickly, understaffed, and insufficiently armed soldiers beat one of the greatest armies on the planet at the time. The Treaty of Paris was signed, the Constitution was ratified. Not too long after, England started another war with the US in 1812, which they lost. And finally, after over 100 years of slavery in the United States, the Civil War occurred, with Abraham Lincoln freeing all of the slaves. As years passed, the world went further into the Industrial Revolution, leading to the invention of skyscrapers, cars, planes, and deadly weapons. With these new weapons, the world was hungry for a war. The Great War, which started in 1914 due to the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. The Great War ended 4 years later. With all the treaties that came after this war, many people called it the war to end all wars. They were right, for about 20 years. World War II. This war was started by an angry fascist with small man syndrome called Hitler, a man with mental issues and a horrible mustache. He was responsible for tens of millions of casualties until he offed himself in a bunker. Shortly after, the Cold War occurred, leading to an almost complete annihilation of everything. The Vietnam War was fought, and over time, multiple national tragedies completely destroyed the psychology of the American nation. And most recently, we just got done with a quarantine of our own. And so here we are. To think that all of this happened just because of a little lump in a vacuum that decided to expand. So much has had to happen for you to exist. Billions of years of death, consumption, and rebirth. You are the result of hundreds of thousands of years of history and the product of recycled cosmic material from the first celestial bodies. You are a star. God damn. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please smash like, destroy the subscribe button. I had to re-record this so many times.